a decrease in estrogens will mess with your attention span. We already know that. And we also know that for a woman who is having active cycles, her estrogen levels will rise and fall during that cycle. And now we know that there are some women who have paid attention and now know that at some point in their cycles, like going towards the periods, that their attention span is lower and they're actually irritable. So it stands to reason that if you have ADHD, and which already, messes with your attention, and you have cycles, you will probably want to schedule your appointments according to how your attention is going to be.
Thomas Edison, Richard Branson, John F. Kennedy, Mozart, Michael Jordan, Will Smith. That sounds like a list of highly successful titans in a variety of vocations. Why is it that we rarely hear that they have or had ADHD? And you know what we hear even less about? Serena Williams, Emma Watson, Mel Robbins, Whoopi Goldberg, Agatha Christie, Erin Brockovich, Cher. Yeah, the successful women navigating ADHD. And that's exactly why I started this podcast, ADHD for Smartass Women. I'm your host, Tracy Otsuka. I'm a lawyer, not a doctor, a lifelong student, now a coach. I'm also the creator of Your ADHD Brain is A-OK, a system that helps people like you figure out what they should do with their life. And we're here today to talk ADHD, your strengths, your symptoms, your workarounds, and how you proudly stand out instead of trying to fit in. I credit my ADHD for some of my greatest gifts. And you know what? I spy a happier life for you too. So without further ado, a shiny new episode is starting now. Hello, I am your host, Tracy Otsuka. Thank you so much for joining me here for episode number 173 of ADHD for Smartass Women. I hope that you'll subscribe to this podcast and our newsletter over at tracyotsuka.com. My purpose is always to show you who you are and then inspire you to be it. In the thousands of ADHD women that I've had the privilege of meeting, I've never met a one that wasn't truly brilliant at something. Not one. And so for all of these reasons, I am delighted to introduce you to Dr. Grace Esan. Dr. Grace Esan is a pediatrician in Evansville, Indiana. She is Nigerian-American, born in Lagos, Nigeria, where she received her medical degree from the College of Medicine, University of Lagos. She completed her pediatrics residency training at the Bronx Lebanon Hospital Center in the Bronx, New York City. She is board certified in pediatrics. She specializes in the treatment of infants, children, and adolescents at all stages of their growth and development, with an emphasis on ADHD, anxiety, depression, and oppositional defiant disorder. She has been in medical practice for over 20 years. Dr. Esan is happily married and is the mother of 2 beautiful children and her pet Chihuahua. Grace, did I get all of that right?
Yes, you absolutely did. You did get it all right.
So I have to ask you, what's your pet Chihuahua's name?
His name is Rudy.
Rudy! Oh my gosh. I love like people names for dogs. I don't know why that is, but I always have. So before we talk about anything else, I always love to start with the ADHD diagnosis story. So could we start there?
Yeah, absolutely. But first, I want to do a couple of things first. I want to thank you very, very, very much for this podcast, because when I found it, I was like, oh my gosh, I did not know there were so many of us out there, doing all kinds of interesting things. So thank you so much. And then I also want to thank you for inviting me on to talk about my favorite topic, ADHD.
Well, I'm just delighted. And, it means a lot to me, especially coming from a doctor. So thank you for being so kind, because You know, we all, well, the gold stars thing, right? We all want to know when our work is making a difference in other people's lives. And I can't hear it enough. So thank you, Grace.
Oh, you're welcome. All right. So you wanted to know about my ADHD diagnosis. So
Well,
here
the
it is. Really,
story, like, you know,
the story. So okay. So here's what happened. I was sitting down, minding my business, and a friend of mine came over. Actually, we went. My husband and I went to visit a friend, and she was having some issues with her then boyfriend, and the problems were to do with forgetfulness and inattention and stuff. And I just thought to myself, I wonder if she has adult ADHD. So, and I'd never ever evaluated an adult for ADHD before. So I went on my phone, found the online adult ADHD thing. We printed it out, gave her one, told her we were sitting there drinking wine and eating crackers. And I said, okay, you fill this out. So while she's filling that out, I'm sitting there looking through the checklist and then the questions go. And then I'm like, yes, for me, yes, for me, yes, for me, yes, for me. I'm like, what? What? So I'm reading through the whole thing, and it is yes for me for most of the answers there. Do I have trouble initiating stuff? Do I have trouble wrapping stuff up once I start? Do and I was like, do I have trouble getting to places on time? Oh yes, absolutely. So I was like, oh my gosh, that means I do have ADHD. So I finished her evaluation, and it turned out that she did have ADHD. Sent her off to her doctor, and then took mine, filled mine out, and then went off to my doctor to go have a talk. And that's essentially how I got diagnosed. And I'm talking, this was probably in 2010 or 2011. So, yeah, that's my ADHD story.
that is crazy. So you knew what ADHD was, at least generally. But was it that you had no idea how it showed up in women, or you really had never put your symptoms in this category that there was something that, you know, this wasn't normal behavior?
Okay, so let's start here and say I didn't even think that I had symptoms. Let's start from there. I was just living my best life. Living my best life, going late to places, not being not just living life by the seat, flying by the seat of my pants, constantly like in a whirl movement. Did not look at those things as symptoms. And I think mostly because I was able to walk around stuff. And so they weren't symptoms to me. And here's the crazy thing, I was taking care of kids and diagnosing kids in my office with ADHD, their inattention, their impulsivity, their hyperactivity. But I never, ever like turned that mirror on myself until I was sitting down doing that evaluation on my friend.
Wow. Okay, so when you're talking about the evaluation, was this just a diagnostic checklist that was on Attitude, you know's website, or what specifically are you talking about?
That's what I'm talking about. It's called the adult self-reporting, the adult
Okay.
ASRS, yes, adult self-reporting screen or skill,
Okay.
yes. So that was what I used because I think that's pretty much that, and then the history of how have you been as a child. And
Hmm.
so when I turned that mirror on myself, then I was like, oh, so, oh,
So
so
that
this
was my
is.
next question. Once you knew it was ADHD and you had the benefit of hindsight, what are some of the symptoms that you always wondered about, but now you recognize them as clearly ADHD, whether we're talking about childhood or adulthood?
Okay, so like I said, I didn't even think that any of these things were symptoms. I grew up in Lagos, Nigeria, and it was you went to parties fashionably late. You never went if the party was at 4. You never turned up until 5. It was just a thing. Nobody would sweat you for coming in late. Now moving to the United States and living in the United States, well, you can't come 1 hour late to a function, and I just couldn't wrap my mind around it. I just kind of thought that it was just because of how I grew up, the culture in which I grew up, and it was not a big, and so I would, try and do other things to make sure that I wasn't late to places. But like time blindness, oh yeah, that's a thing for me. Once I get going doing something that I really like, then I totally forget hyper focus. Then I totally forget what it was I was supposed to be doing in 5 minutes. So that definitely was a thing. Procrastination, especially procrastinating on things that I didn't really care for, was a big deal. Was a big deal. My father would call it inertia because he'll be like, I asked you to go do XYZ. And I'm still here 20 minutes later. He's like, you've got inertia. Now, inertia is a word in physics, which is, I think, the force that is required to overcome, to get you going. He's like, go do what I asked you to do. So stuff like that. So the lateness, the procrastination, the impulsivity, because I'll just get a thought in my head and I'll just go do it and not really think anything about it. But I really didn't think that those were a big deal because I guess because I didn't get into trouble for doing like big trouble for doing things like that. And then the hyper focus, of course, saves my life all the time because once I get focused on stuff, then it gets done and it gets done in record time and gets done good. So those things I never really thought of them as symptoms. It was just me. That was just my life. Chaotic.
Well, but the thing about it is, obviously, you're a doctor. You must have done well in school.
Oh, okay. So let's talk about school.
Okay.
So school was interesting in elementary school. And okay, you all have middle school here. We don't have middle school, or we didn't have middle school then. We had high school. In elementary
Mhm.
school, I was fine. In fact, I was brilliant. Let's call it that. Got into high school a year earlier than my contemporaries, than my peers. I skipped a class and went into high school. Got into high school, did well the first couple of years. The last 3 years of high school, I could not tell you what happened. I just, bottom just fell out. I became inattentive and could not, like, assignments were missing. Got into a lot of trouble for not having notes in classes. And once again, did not really think a thing of it. I really wonder what my parents thought of me at that point in time. I think they probably thought I was just lazy or something.
Mhm.
Then get into college, first year in college, totally bottomed out because I just could not cope. I just
Mhm.
couldn't cope. And the farther you fall behind, the worse it gets. Now, um,
Can I ask, are you inattentive or are you combined type?
I'm combined, but I'm mostly inattentive
Okay.
because I can have like sports of hyperactivity, or, well, let me say, when I was younger, I would say I was combined,
Mhm.
definitely. But now I think I'm
Mhm.
older, so I don't have the energy to be jumping to be jumping around. So now I'm mostly inattentive. But I went through the one thing that really, really smacked me in the face was the fact that I went through medical school not having written one note. I could not write any notes to save my life.
What?
Yes.
What does that even mean? What does it mean that you never wrote a note?
I could not write a note. I took the
You must
notebooks
be
to class.
super bright.
I don't know about that. I somehow it worked. I don't know how it worked. So I went to class and I would take my notes and things to write in class. And I would start the class out. The first 15 minutes would be great. I'd write down everything that was being said. And then nothing after that. It's like I'd be missing words, I'd be missing phrases.
Mm.
So and I couldn't go, at examination time. We used to have our exams like once a year. Examination time. I finally figured it out. I figured out the kids who had the best notes, the most complete notes, the most readable notes, and I spent all my pocket money making photocopies of their notes, and then I would read those.
So you took the notes that other students did and you learned from their notes.
I learned from their notes. Yes, I was in the class.
Ah,
And then the other thing that clinicals were kind of fun for me because I think those are things that my brain really liked. So anything I heard during
okay.
the
Tell
rounds.
us what a clinical. What's a clinical?
All right, clinicals are okay. So the first couple of years in medical school, you pretty much doing like the basic sciences, the pharmacology and all of that, the like your foundation, and then clinicals are when you then actually are going to the hospital and you're seeing patients and they're teaching
Mm,
you around the patients. So you
got it.
have, yes,
Real world medicine.
yes, real world medicine. So that's the last 3 years of College of Medicine, and I love that because it was hands on. I could see, I could hear, and anything I heard, I didn't forget. And they would ask questions. Once again, I did. Like I said, I couldn't take notes. I would start taking the notes, and they'll be a hot mess. So going back to look through my notes to be able to answer the questions during the next word round would be almost an impossible thing. But because I had heard it, so I guess I'm an auditory learner. So because
Yeah.
I'd heard it, then I'd be able to like, oh yeah, this is what happened. And then because I could see it and I could imagine what would be. So I could extrapolate and I could come up with answers. So I did all that, but I was a horrible test taker. Horrible test taker.
I
So
don't believe that. How did you get through med school?
I don't know.
Again, you must be really smart.
But I did. I did.
Uh-huh.
It was a struggle. It was a struggle for me because when I look back, I was tortured and tormented because I could not understand why I was the way I was, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
I couldn't understand why I couldn't write notes. And so I felt really bad and felt, I would have lots of negative self talk. And I remember having a conversation once with my dad. My dad's like, what is going on with you? You're not doing well on your test and stuff like that. And I finally told him, I said, I don't bother studying because I know I'm going to fail anyway. So what's the point? And he was like, that is such a bad attitude. And he gave me, he gave me a talking to, and the talking to was a good pep talk. My dad and I pretty close, good pep talk. And then, so I went back and, tried. And I think it was because of stuff like that, I was able to figure out that, okay, I cannot study for examinations if I don't have notes. So let's figure out the person who has the notes and photocopy their notes and study off of that. By my fourth year in medical school, I figured out that, oh, I hate to sit still and study. Like everybody will be studying 2 months, 3 months to the examination. I start studying about a month to my examination. But that's where hyperfocus will kick in because the amount of,
Mhm.
of material that I'll be able to cover in 3 weeks would astonish me. But I never,
Wow.
I didn't know there was a thing called hyperfocus, so I didn't know that that was what it was that I was doing. Um, so yeah, so and then I also figured out that I liked to do what do you call them? Where you go with a group of people studies, group studies. What do we call them? So would have a group of people, everybody contributed, and I didn't contribute. I just I didn't contribute anything. I just listened to everybody else talking, and I picked up a lot of information that way. But that's pretty much how I went through medical school. I don't even think my parents are aware of this is the first time I'm actually verbalizing all of this.
Wow. So, do you struggle to read? Was that hard for you, or could you look at the books and you could read?
Okay, so it depends on what we're reading. I'm absolutely
Mm.
okay reading a whodunit.
We love those, right? Especially like the murder
Absolutely.
ones.
Yes. I'm fine reading those. Now, stick a textbook in front of me and I'm going to be asleep in like 10 minutes. So I figure that once again, that if I take that stuff and I listen to it, driving back and forth or walking up and down in my kitchen, I get more achieved from listening than actually sitting and reading. Or I would have to read in short bursts. I know I'm not going to sit still and read for a long, or it has to be something I'm really interested in. And if it's something I'm really interested in, I lose time. I'll be there for hours and hours just looking for stuff, looking for this stuff. So it's crazy because it's either fist or farming. It's either I'm not doing it or I'm totally doing it.
Yeah. And that's us, right? When we're interested, nobody does it better. But when we're not interested, yeah, we just don't care.
No, don't care at all.
So,
Don't care at all.
did you have siblings?
I have four brothers. I have four
And were
brothers.
they any of them like this too? Do you think any of them have ADHD, or was it
Um,
just you?
I actually think that we all do to a certain extent. They won't agree with me,
Mhm.
but to a certain
Mhm.
extent, we all do. But they, once again, we're all pretty successful. We've done pretty well for ourselves. One is an IT specialist, another is a banker, another is a lawyer, another is a human resource specialist. So we've pretty much done well. But the one brother of mine that I know for sure, and when I talk to him about it, he thinks I'm just talking a lot of nonsense. He's the one that I'll be talking to, and he's doing three different things at the same time and still listening to me. Like,
Mhm.
I'm like,
Mhm.
how are you talking to me and texting on the phone and driving at the same time? You can't do all three. You've got to put
Well, and
one
I
down.
have news for them. Grace, you're the doctor, so you win.
So
Okay, so
yeah,
tell me about your pediatrics residency training at the Bronx. What is it called? Bronx Lebanon Hospital
yeah.
Center,
At Bronx
basically in the
Lebanon.
Bronx.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
What
did
made you
well.
do this?
I actually
I'm
did
sure
well
you
there.
did because of ADHD, right? I mean,
Right.
just the intensity and, empathy. And just like you said, when you're really focused, you're all in. And
Mhm.
I'm sorry, but patients know that.
Really?
Don't you think like they really know when you care?
I would think so. I would hope so. I would
Hmm.
hope so. But yeah, at the Bronx, Lebanon, I even astonished some old classmates of mine because I actually made chief. They made me chief resident, much to my surprise. Um, but
Hmm.
for me to be chief, I obviously must have done something good. And so when I told a couple of friends of, well, old classmates of mine, we met up for drinks, and they said, "Oh, where are you?" And I said, "I'm at the Bronx, Lebanon. I'm the chief." And they were like, "No, you're not." And I'm like, "Yes, I am." So yeah, but I did well, and I think because of the intensity was great, and
Yes.
then it had multiple moving parts, and I just loved it. I just loved the clinicals. I loved doing what I was doing, troubleshooting. I just loved it. So that wasn't difficult at all.
So how long is a residency? I'm not sure. Is it 3 years?
Residency is 3 years, but because I was chief, I spent an extra year.
Okay. And so why do you think you were so good at this? Because clearly you were. You wouldn't be chief resident if you weren't outstanding at it.
Um, I think I was. I think probably. I mean, several reasons. Um, Part of, like, in all the research that I've been doing now, thanks to you and your podcast, and then I've found other people, is that I've found out that it's not just those three things that we think that we've always thought in medicine that are hallmarks of ADHD, the impulsivity, inattention, and hyperactivity. There are other things like empathy and intuition and um, that impulsivity. Once again, that impulsivity is actually a thing, and it can be good or bad, but it's been all good for me because, like I said, I haven't gotten into trouble for it yet. But it's that thing that will make you step out of your comfort zone and say, hey, how about we do this with you, and how about we think about this, and not, be worried that I'm going to get into trouble for speaking up and saying that. But I think the empathy, I think ADHDers are blessed with being empathetic and intuitive. You can walk into a room and pretty much read that room and know who needs a hug,
Mhm.
and know who to avoid because the person is not a nice person.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I think that plays a big role.
Are
Yeah.
you a challenge the status quoer? Like you have no qualms about if you think that if you don't agree with something and everybody's doing it one way, will you be the one that stands up and says, nope, I don't think we should do it this way. I think we should do this.
Yes, yes, and actually, um, more as I've gotten older, I have learned that that doesn't always work out very well, and so sometimes I will pull myself back. but
You're
typically, um,
so right.
but typically, I'm the closet ODD person who's like, yeah, okay, you all want to do that? Fine, go ahead, do that. I won't be doing that.
Totally. Okay, so you're a pediatrician. You sounds like you have this specialty of ADHD for kids. I'm curious, what have you seen from your patients, specifically your ADHD girls? Do you have some stories?
Um, what I've found out about ADHD girls, I don't really have stories per se, but once I figured out that it's really the moms. It's not the girls because the girls will come in. The girls are really difficult to diagnose. From in my opinion, I'm just going to talk about what I have experienced. And the girls are difficult to diagnose because your parents don't bring you to the doctor because you're failing or because you're borderline failing or because there is a mismatch between what your intellectual level is and how you're performing academically. They don't usually come to me for that reason. They come to me for anxiety, depression. And when they come to me for anxiety and depression, because I know that there's such a big overlap, I start to ask about how they're doing at school. And then when they start telling me that, well, we're not doing that well at school, then I break it down. I'm like, okay, is it the classes that is the problem, or is it that you're not turning your homework? And they will tell me both. And I'll be like, why aren't you turning your homework in? Because I forget to do it, or because I get it done and I forget to turn it in. I'm like, don't you think that's kind of weird for you to do all that work and not get any credit for it? And they'll be like, they'll shrug, but they'll be like, they just can't remember to turn it back in. Okay, what's happening in class? Are you daydreaming? Or and some of them will say, yeah, I'm daydreaming, and others will say, well, I just can't focus. So when I'm talking to the girls about anxiety and depression, I will always talk about school as well. And then when I figure out that we're having issues at school, then I then go back to the parents and I say, how does she do at home? How many times can you tell her to go do three things? Can you tell her to go to your room, get your pink hat, your yellow fluffy shoes, and your handbag? And will she come back with all three? And they'll laugh and they'll be like, absolutely not. She might actually get up there and forget what she went up there to do. And so then I would be like, okay, we will evaluate this anxiety depression thing, but we also have to have a conversation about potential ADHD. Now, the problem then comes because we have these skills that we'll give to the parent and we'll also give to the teachers. The parents will fill it out, the teachers will fill it out, and there'll be no symptoms on it. And the reason why the teachers fill it out with no symptoms because the kids, the girls are just sitting there as nice can be. They're very pleasant. They're just there, you know. They're not causing any trouble. So they don't see all the things that supposedly everyone is looking for, which is the hyperactivity or the blotting out of things in class, or
Mhm.
losing stuff. They're just very nice kids. So when I get that, so I'll get a discrepant scale from the teacher versus the story the kid has told me versus what the parents are saying. So when I have that, then I have to send those girls to actually a psychologist for a formal evaluation. But that's the problem. The problem is usually that because they're inattentive, they will talk with their friends, but if they have anxiety with it, they won't talk in class because they don't want the attention on themselves. So it becomes tricky to catch the girls. Now the moms, sometimes I'm talking to the moms about their son's hyperactivity and stuff, and then I'm trying to explain what ADHD is, and I see a light go up in their eyes, and they're like, that sounds like me when I was a kid. And I still do that
Yeah.
now. And so these days, I have the adult self reporting skill in my office. I'll just pull that out and have them fill it out. And they fill it out, and it shows me that they have symptoms. I'm like, you probably have this. Depends on how badly it affects you. you may want to talk to your doctor about this, and I'll hand it to them and send them on their way.
So it almost sounds like it's the list of symptoms in the DSM that's the problem for girls and women.
Uh, yes and no, because we don't. I mean, with the girls, even the girls don't even know that they have they're not even, they've done this all their lives. They've daydreamed all their lives. They don't know that it's not normal
Mhm.
for your mind to
Mhm.
flit from subject to subject to subject while you're supposed to be paying attention to this one boring subject that you can't pay attention to in class. So, the thing that catches my attention, or that I usually will look for, is a discrepancy between the level of intelligence when I'm talking to the kid and how badly they're doing at school. Because,
Absolutely. Yeah.
because if there's a discrepancy, which I would say was pretty much my situation too, because I would say that I didn't do tests well at all. And even now, when, because we have to do continuing medical education, when I have to sit down and do a test, I feel myself hyperventilating sometimes. Just, and then I tell myself, you're a grown person, stop it. It's not so bad.
Well, yeah, it's probably the trauma, right? I mean, granted, it's not big T trauma, but you can imagine if every single time you had to sit in an exam from the time you were little and you had this anxiety, like you knew you're smart, right? Or you know you're
Right.
smart, but you can't show your intelligence the way they want you to show your intelligence.
Exactly. I like the way you put it. That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
But
Yeah.
then I think part of it is that the teachers don't know what they're looking for. And the way their testing scales, or I don't know what you call that, but you know what the teachers fill out, the questions that they ask, well, how do they know what that child is thinking, right? Especially the girls, because they're not climbing up the walls and they're
Hmm.
masking. And, it's no wonder that it comes out as anxiety and depression. I mean, man, if you know
Well,
how smart
yeah,
you are and you can't.
the kids, just the girls especially, they just become very anxious and depressed
Mhm.
because they think they just know that there's something is off.
Yeah.
I'm trying, and then I'm trying to do well, and then sometimes it's really really genuine, because about 60% of people with ADHD will also have anxiety or depression. And
Mhm.
you look at the family, and that's true too. So they feel, the ADHD makes them feel inadequate, and then their anxieties, especially when they have social anxiety, makes them feel like they need to be invisible. So it's really difficult when you're trying to diagnose a girl.
Okay, so what about women? I know that's a big subject that you love to research and talk about. So I know that the DSM-5 says that symptoms have to be present in childhood. Yet often ADHD symptoms seem like they don't show up until adulthood. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Truthfully, I would say that, yeah, I know the DSM says so. However, um, there are some of what I would call adult onset ADHD, which may be due to, because anxiety also can present as inattention. So that's something
Sure.
else to have, take into consideration. So one has to kind of tease those things out. However, if it's true ADHD, even when you're old, you can look back into your life, and there's specific things that you would know and remember that did not work out for you. Like, for instance, as we know from your podcast, every time I listen to your podcast, I'm always amazed at the different numbers of careers that each of these women have had. Start out, I'm a waitress, then I'm a teacher, then over here, you know so when you look at the fact that they go where their interest takes them, and they're constantly moving, or they're constantly changing jobs, and the reason why they're changing jobs is because nobody can get along with them. That's what they will tell you, not that they are the ones verbally um, shooting themselves in the foot because they're so impulsive, or they make money and they fritter the money away because they're impulsive spenders. If you actually go back and ask specific stories, how do you do with money? um, how do you do with relationships? How many jobs have you
Mm.
had? Those kind of things will actually open your eyes to. And then, how did you do in school? A lot of my parents will initially fudge about how they did in school, but I would press on them and say, does your mom have your report cards? You may want to go home and look at your report cards and see what it is. Now, the more open parents that I have will be like, oh my God, I got into trouble because I talked all day long. So that would kind of give you an idea that that person may not have had symptoms until they went to college because the guardrails were removed. Mom's no longer there to remind you to do all the things that you're supposed to do,
Yep.
and stay on you. And so those guardrails are gone. But if we go back and we go back to look at what you did, if your mom was not reminding you about your homework, then that homework didn't get done. If we look at your report card, they'll be like, XYZ is a pleasure to have in class. However, she talks excessively.
It's the one
you
I
know.
had.
So yeah, there's the history. The history is there, and history doesn't go away. So if it's a real ADHD, there'll be a history, and it takes talking to them. However, the way we practice medicine in this country precludes stuff like that. I'm expected to be in and out of a room in 15 minutes, and I'm supposed to have figured out what's wrong with that kid in that period of time. And that does not, I can't sit down and start doing a good family history to figure out whether mom or grandma had this kind of issues. If I have 15 minutes, 15 minutes doesn't cut it.
It's insanity. So what do you do in those situations? Do you just make a second appointment and you just want to see them at different times?
I get into trouble. That's what I do. Because
Oh, good trouble though, right?
good trouble
Yeah.
because and I think I get into trouble not because I want to get into trouble, because we're talking about that hyper focus thing that comes in again. I'm solving a puzzle and I'm halfway there and I'm totally focused. I've forgotten what the time is. So my staff actually has to come and send me a note in the computer telling me, hey, you're running behind. So a lot of times I get stuck like that. Other times, yeah, I will give them the paperwork and tell them to go home and tell them to go ask their parents, and at the second visit, give me those answers.
That's fascinating to me. Just those two words that you just used, solving a puzzle. And that is exactly what I think really good doctors do, despite all the constructs around medicine, right? Because it makes that so impossible. It's not integrative. And I love that. I love those two words, solving a puzzle.
Yeah, it's a puzzle.
Okay, so tell me about hormones and ADHD and women. Any thoughts around that?
Yeah, I do. Now, here's the interesting thing. A decrease in estrogens will mess with your attention span. We already know
Yep.
that. And we
Mhm.
also know that for a woman who is having active cycles, her estrogen levels will rise and fall during that cycle. And
Mhm.
now we know that there are some women who have paid attention and now know that at some point in their cycles, like going towards the periods, that their attention span is lower and they're actually irritable. So it stands to reason that if you have ADHD, and which already uh, messes with your attention, and you have cycles, if you have fluctuating periods of attention, of inattention, or fluctuating periods of attention, for me it makes a lot of sense that women like that should try, and especially if you're a CEO or an administrator, you will probably want to schedule your appointments according to how your attention is going to be.
Yeah.
And so for all the people who are out there looking, and then of course, like I think, like you said, the people who are going to have to do these studies are going to then have to be women, because obviously the guys are kind of like whatever. The guys are not
Exactly.
necessarily vested in trying to figure out how estrogens really do affect our attention.
And that's what's so insane to me is the fact that, it's just And no studies really take women into account. Very few studies take women into account when it comes to health because of the fact that, oh, those pesky hormones, it's too expensive to do studies and deal with that, right?
Well, I don't know that it is that. I believe that number one, I think we women and the world in general, the culturally, we kind of just take women for granted. Or we just they're just there. They're there. They're strong. They're dependable. They're okay. And so nobody really thinks that, well, maybe women are not just, maybe, yeah, we're stoic, but maybe we do need some help too. And that's why I said I think this particular kind of studies that we're talking about are definitely going to have to be done by women, women with ADHD that have to, that are trying to prove something. Otherwise, it will never get done.
Well, and I think the default when it comes to most anything in this world is always men. So the assumption is that, well, if this particular medication works for men and their heart issues, of course it's going to work for
What for
women
women?
because, we're the same and we're not the same.
No, we're not
So,
the same. We're definitely
ah,
not the same. Now, the other thing that I also wonder, because once again, there are no real studies about this, is just like we figured out that some girls become extremely inattentive when they start having periods. It's also the same with some boys. Some boys start becoming inattentive too as they
during
hit puberty.
puberty, is
Yeah,
that
as
what
they
you
hit
mean?
yes, as they hit puberty. Yes. Yes,
Mm.
as they hit puberty. I've had a couple of kids in my practice, and me and my nurse practitioner, we've actually thought to ourselves that we wonder if that is a thing, or whether this kid just did well, and was able to escape it, and then as things got more and more difficult, then now we're picking up on it. But I wonder about the boys as well. I wonder about the guys as well.
Well, and think about it too. I mean, when does the oppositional behavior normally really show up? It makes sense. So, Grace, what do you think the key to living successfully with ADHD is?
Well, I think the key to living successfully with it is embracing yourself, accepting the fact that this is who you are. Your brain does not work like everybody else's brain. And so do not expect it to work like everybody else. I think once you come to that realization that your brain is very different from everybody else's brain, and it's a special kind of brain. I call it like I'll borrow something from Instagram, a Ferrari brain, and like a really cool high, motorized brain, a problem solving brain. So once you realize that your brain does what it wants to do, and there's nothing really wrong with you, you just match to the sound of a different beat, then you accept yourself. So if you can accept yourself and stop trying to be what everybody else thinks that you need to be, then you will be fine. And then in doing that, if you then figure out what your strengths are, and amplify those strengths, and then you can uh what's the word I'm looking for, you can have other people do all the other things that you don't care for. um yeah, then life will be good. Like, for instance, I am not good at, I won't say I'm not good, because I would be good if I wanted to, but I don't care about house cleaning.
Yeah. Yes.
I don't care about house cleaning, so I have a housekeeper. And I think the day I discovered that I could actually have a housekeeper and not have to stress about mopping the floor, was one of the best days of my life, because I hated doing that stuff. So it's like that. So the minute you figure out the things that you're strong at, and amplify those things and work at those things, and then figure out the other things that you're not necessarily good at, and decide whether or not you want to be good at them, but don't beat yourself up if you're not. The big thing is the mental beating up, because we just sit down and think to ourselves, that person looks so put together. That person's house looks really well organized. Why can't my house be that organized? This person is able to do A, B, and C, and D. Why can't I do that? And then I start telling myself that there must be something wrong with me. There's absolutely nothing wrong with me. I just happen to do things differently. There are going to be some things that I can do, and I can do exceedingly well, that those people cannot do. So I just need to, like, accept myself, and accept myself for who I am, and embrace the fact that my brain thinks differently, and that's just it.
I love it. I love it. Do you have a number one ADHD workaround?
Okay, so I knew you were going to ask me that, and I don't think I have one. I don't think I have one. I have like little things that I do. Um, like for instance, I'm very thankful for all this keyless cars. So my key fob is always in my bag. I never take it out. So that way I'm not looking for my keys in the morning. I count. I like to do one, two, three, four, fives. I count things that I do like in the morning, get up in the morning, brush my teeth, take a shower, put on my clothes, counting fives like that.
Mm-hmm.
Or if I'm
So you don't
traveling,
miss anything.
so I don't miss anything exactly. Or if I'm traveling, I count how many pieces of baggage I have so that every time I get up to go, I'm like, one, two, three, four, five, or one, two, three.
Yeah.
So I don't lose stuff. So little itty bitty things like that. But I don't do a lot of technology, because the other thing about me, and I think this is the inattentive part of me, is that when there are too many steps to getting stuff done, then I get lost. I just get muddled. So I just like to keep it simple. I like notepads and list writing. I,
Mm-hmm.
I can't do the I also like my phone, the calendar on my phone. I put all my appointments in the calendar in my phone, and then I have alarms to remind me. Otherwise, I'll never remember to get to those appointments. But those kind of little things, but all the high tech things that other people talk about, I'm like, I think about it. There are too many steps. I can't do that. So once again,
Well, and that might be,
it's knowing what it is you can do.
yeah. I was just going to say that might be your number one ADHD workaround, right? Just
Keep-
figuring out what works for you and keeping it
Keeping it
simple
simple.
and yeah.
Yeah.
So are you working on something that you want to tell us about?
Yeah. I am working on a couple of things. I think my current mission is to create awareness around ADHD and help to destigmatize the ADHD diagnosis. A lot of people seem to think that it's a bad diagnosis to have. I actually think it's only the blessed few that actually have it. And I think I'm one of them.
I agree.
So I don't look at it as a detraction or something that is bad to have. I actually think that if you know and you understand it and you can make it work for you, you'll be fantastic. The world needs ADHDers because these are the people who are the creators, they are the innovators, they're the inventors of the world in which we live. So I think we all need to step up and claim our dazzling brilliance.
I love it.
So so in doing that, like I started an Instagram page where I put out information about ADHD and information about it. I try to make it fun. So I have my Instagram page at Thrive with Dr. Grace. And that's on Instagram. And then I also have a website, thrivewithdrgrace.com. And I also would do consultations, not with the purpose of giving medication, but with the purpose of giving advice on whether or not you have it. Because some people think they have it and they don't. Giving advice on whether or not you have ADHD, and then giving you a framework for how to speak with your doctor, speak with your family or your friends about your diagnosis, and helping you own it. I have toyed with the idea of being an ADHD coach. I'm still twiddling with that, but I think that would be the next place for me to go with that. But that's that's
That is
that's where I'm at.
That's amazing. So, because you'd be offering consultation, you can do that anywhere in the country and anywhere in the world,
Yes,
correct?
correct. I
Oh
can
my gosh. I love that. So, they have someone who's educated to go to that can help them then prepare for that big meeting with their ADHD, professional
providers.
in their
Yes,
area.
yes,
Okay.
yes,
And they can find you, all of your socials, your website, everything is at Thrive with Dr. Grace,
yes.
correct?
Correct. Correct.
Wonderful. Well, all of this is going to be in the show notes. Grace, thank you so much for spending time with us here today. I really appreciate it.
No, Tracy, thank you very, very much. Thank you so much for all of what you do, because this is amazing. This is great stuff for those of us with ADHD that, would be lost without it. So really, really appreciate you.
Oh, well, I appreciate you. So that's what I have for you for this week. If you like this episode with Dr. Grace Esan, did I say it right?
Yes, you did.
Esan. Okay. Please let us know by leaving a review. Our goal is to change the conversation around ADHD, helping as many women as we possibly can learn how their ADHD brains work so that they too may discover their amazing strengths. And your reviews, they really help in that regard. As always, you're listening to ADHD for Smartass Women. Come join me over at tracyoutsuka.com. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you here next week. You've been listening to the ADHD for Smartass Women podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Outsuka, and we're available on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Not coincidentally, ADHD for Smartass Women, it's also the name of our free Facebook group. We're a totally smartass community of successful, ambitious women who share our ADHD wins, questions, and workarounds. Join us at tracyoutsuka.com, where you can also find more information on our Your ADHD Brain is A-OK system. I spy a happier life for us, and I'll see you again next week.